I always thought the hardest day of my life would be the day I buried my husband. I was wrong. The hardest day was the day my only daughter, the child I raised alone, looked me in the eye in front of 200 people and told me to leave her wedding. My name is Amelia, and I am 67 years old. I have lived through heartbreak, loss, and the slow, quiet ache of growing old. But nothing prepared me for the moment my daughter Grace, radiant in white, turned her back on me when I needed her love the most. The morning of Grace's wedding, I woke before dawn. My hands trembled as I ironed my wine-colored dress, smoothing every wrinkle with the care of someone who wanted to be flawless. I chose my mother's pearl earrings, the ones I'd saved for this day, and dabbed rose perfume on my wrists. I barely touched my breakfast, nerves fluttering in my stomach. Today, I told myself everything would change. Today, my daughter would see me. She would value me. She would remember all the nights I stayed up with her fevers, all the stories I read to her, all the sacrifices I made so she could have a better life. My sister Victoria called as I was fastening my necklace. "Are you ready for the big day?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I'm more than ready," I replied, blinking back tears. "I have a feeling today will be different. Today, Grace will give me the place I deserve." Victoria was silent for a moment. She knew our history. She knew how complicated things had become since Grace moved in with Theodore, how the visits had become scarcer, the calls colder, the encounters more tense. "Just take care of yourself, Amelia. Don't expect too much," but I had already made my decision. Today would be the day of our reconciliation. Today, my daughter would give me the place I deserved in her life after so many years of coldness and distance. I took the gift I had prepared for the couple, a fine china set I'd been paying for in installments for a year. Each plate was an apology. Each cup was a chance to start over. I had even sold my wedding ring to pay for it in full. The taxi arrived promptly at 2 p.m. The ride to the church was a blur of city streets and hopeful daydreams. I imagined Grace running to greet me, her arms open, her voice full of forgiveness. I imagined the hug we would share, the sweet words we would exchange, the mutual understanding that would finally heal our wounds. The church was decorated with white and pale pink flowers, just as Grace had always dreamed. I arrived early to make sure I got a good seat, preferably in the front row where she could see me throughout the ceremony. But when I approached the first pews, the wedding planner stopped me. "Excuse me, ma'am. Those seats are reserved for the immediate family." "I am the mother of the bride," I said, my voice full of pride. He checked his list and frowned. "I'm sorry, but it says here you should sit in the 5th row. My smile faded. The 5th row, as if I were just any guest, as if I hadn't been the one who gave my life for the child about to become a wife. I sat where I was told, surrounded by strangers, while I watched the first pews fill with Theodore's friends, Grace's co-workers, people who had appeared in her life long after I had. When the music started and I saw my daughter walking toward the altar, beautiful in her white dress, with that radiant smile I had known since she was a baby, my heart filled with love and hope. Surely all of this was just a misunderstanding. Surely at the reception, things would be different. The ceremony was perfect. Theodore seemed like a good man, and the way he looked at Grace reassured me. At least my daughter had found someone who truly loved her. That was the only thing that mattered, right? When the ceremony ended, I approached to congratulate them, but there were so many people that I could barely give Grace a quick kiss on the cheek. "You look beautiful, my love," I whispered. She barely smiled at me before turning to other guests. The reception was held in an elegant hall overlooking the garden. The tables were decorated with fresh flowers and candles that created a magical atmosphere. I arrived with my gift under my arm, looking for the table where I had been assigned. My heart sank a little more when I found my place, table number 8, at the back of the hall next to the kitchen, so far from the main table that I could barely see the bride and groom. My table companions were people who clearly didn't know anyone else. Obligation guests, relegated like me. "Are you a relative of the bride?" An elderly lady sitting next to me asked. "I am her mother," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. The woman looked at me with surprise, clearly confused as to why the mother of the bride was sitting so far from the head table. I wondered the same thing. From my seat, I watched as Grace received congratulations, laughed with her friends, and hugged Theodore's mother with an affection I didn't remember receiving from her in years. Every gesture hurt like a small stab in my chest. Dinner was served, but by the time the waiters reached our table, the food was already lukewarm. I picked at my chicken, unable to taste anything but bitterness. The wine failed to soothe the ache in my throat. I kept glancing at the main table, hoping Grace would look my way, would wave or smile, or even just acknowledge me. But she was too busy, too radiant, too far away. I felt invisible on the most important day of her life. When it was time for the toasts, my heart quickened. Maybe now, during her speech, she would mention me. Maybe she would thank me for everything I had done for her, for all the sacrifices, for all the love I had given her. Theodore spoke first. He thanked his parents, his friends, his co-workers. He talked about his new family, about the dreams he shared with Grace. It was a beautiful speech full of love and gratitude. When he finished, everyone applauded excitedly. Then Grace stood up. She was radiant, her cheeks flushed with emotion, and perhaps from the champagne. She took the glass and smiled at all the guests. "I want to thank all the special people who are here with me today," she began. "To the friends who have become siblings, to the colleagues who have become family." My breathing quickened. Here it came. Here she would mention me. "I've learned that family isn't always the one who shares your blood," she continued, and I felt something break inside my chest. The real family are those people who choose to be with you, who support you, who make you grow. The words hit me like stones. Every sentence was a rejection. Every smile of hers was a slap in the face to everything I had been for her. "My chosen family are the ones who make me happy," she said, raising her glass higher. And all the guests applauded enthusiastically. Those who celebrate my achievements without envy, who push me forward without judging me. I kept waiting, clinging to the last hope that maybe at the end of her speech there would be a word for me, a single word that would justify my presence there. But then her eyes met mine. For the first time all night, she looked directly at me. And what I saw in that look was not love, not gratitude, not even indifference. It was pure contempt. "And I also want to say," she continued without taking her eyes off me, "that there are people who don't deserve to be in this special moment. People who only bring negativity and bitterness into our lives." The hall fell silent. All faces turned towards me because it was obvious who she was referring to. My face burned with shame, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Mom," she said finally. And that word I had so longed to hear sounded like a sentence. "You can leave." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people looked at me, some with surprise, others with morbid curiosity, some with pity. I felt like the world was collapsing around me. My hands trembled as I placed the napkin on the table. My wine-colored dress, which I had ironed with such care, now felt like a ridiculous costume. I stood up slowly with all the dignity I had left. But then something unexpected happened. Theodore, who had been sitting next to Grace, also stood up. His eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen before, and his jaw was tense with anger. "What are you doing?" Grace whispered, pulling on his arm to make him sit down again. But he broke free from her grasp and walked toward the microphone. His black suit looked impeccable, but his face showed a determination that sent a chill down my spine. He took the microphone with steady hands and looked directly at my daughter. "Grace, before your mother leaves, I think there are a few things everyone here should know." My daughter had turned as white as a sheet. "Theodore, no." "Don't do this. Don't do what?" "Tell the truth." His voice echoed throughout the hall. "Because it turns out I do know the truth about your mother." I was still standing by my table, not knowing whether to stay or go. My legs were trembling so much that I had to hold on to the back of the chair. All the guests were looking at us as if we were part of a show. "When we started dating 3 years ago, Grace always spoke ill of her mother," Theodore continued, without taking his eyes off my daughter. "She told me she was a bitter, controlling woman who was always criticizing everything she did." Grace had risen from her chair and was walking toward him. "Theodore, please don't go on." She told me that her mother had never supported her, that she had always put obstacles in her way, that she was a burden, a toxic person it was better to stay away from. I believed her, because I trusted her, because I thought I knew the woman I was going to marry. But a month ago, I decided to investigate on my own. Grace reached him and was trying to snatch the microphone from him. "Enough! This is our wedding." "Exactly, Grace, our wedding. And I can't marry someone who is capable of lying like this." The hall was completely silent. Even the waitresses had stopped moving. Everyone was waiting to find out what Theodore had discovered. Theodore's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "I went to talk to Miss Victoria, Grace's aunt. I wanted to know the full version of the family story before I got married, and what I discovered left me speechless. My heart pounded in my chest. Victoria had always known the truth, but I never imagined she would share it with Theodore. I watched as Grace's face crumpled, her confidence draining away with every word. "It turns out that Amelia is not the bitter woman Grace described to me," Theodore said, his voice carrying through the hall. "She is a woman who was widowed when her daughter was 12. A woman who worked 18 hours a day to raise her daughter alone. Amelia sold her house, her jewelry, her furniture, everything of value she had to pay for Grace's private university. She worked as a maid, as a waitress, as whatever was necessary so that her daughter never lacked anything." I felt the eyes of the room shift from Grace to me. I wanted to disappear, but I couldn't move. Theodore continued. "When Grace graduated from university, instead of thanking her mother, she moved to another city. She left Amelia alone after this woman had sacrificed her entire life for her. And during these 3 years we've been together, do you know how many times Grace has gone to visit her mother? How many times she's called her to ask how she is? 3 times. 3 times in 3 years. And every time Amelia called her, Grace rejected the call. Every time her mother sent her a message, Grace ignored it. Tears streamed down my cheeks. All those unanswered calls, all those messages read but not answered, he knew everything." Theodore's voice softened. "But what impressed me the most was discovering that Amelia continued to send Grace money during her first year after university. Money she needed for her own expenses, for her medicine, for her food. And when Grace finally got a stable job, do you know what she did? She told her mother she didn't need her anymore, that it was time for each of them to go their own way." Grace was sobbing now, her perfect makeup streaked down her cheeks. She looked so small, so lost, standing in the center of the room in her white dress. Theodore turned to me. "Mrs. Amelia, I didn't know any of this when I invited you to this wedding. I thought you were the terrible woman Grace had described to me, but now I know that you are the bravest and most generous woman I have ever met." He walked toward me, his voice trembling with emotion. "When Victoria told me your story, I couldn't believe it. She told me you even sold your wedding ring to pay for Grace's last university semesters, that you worked cleaning offices at night after your day job so she could study without worries. She told me that when Grace got sick with appendicitis in her second year of university, you went into debt to pay for a private clinic because the public doctors said she had to wait, that you stayed awake for 3 days straight taking care of her." Grace's sobs grew louder. The room was silent except for her cries and Theodore's voice. "Victoria also told me that you never remarried, never had another partner because you said your priority was to be a good mother, that you rejected 3 marriage proposals because those men did not accept that Grace was the most important thing in your life. And do you know what else Victoria told me? She told me that Amelia keeps all the photos of her daughter from when she was a baby until now, that she has a whole album of all her achievements, all her graduations, all her important moments. She told me that Amelia speaks of you with pride to all her neighbors, that she boasts that her daughter is a university graduate, that she has a good job, that she is going to marry a good man, that despite everything, you love her unconditionally." Theodore's voice hardened. "But what hurt me the most to know, Grace, was that when I proposed to you and asked if you wanted to invite your mother, you told me that she didn't deserve to be at our special day, that she was a resentful woman who would only bring trouble. I insisted on inviting her because I thought maybe you could reconcile, but you put her at the back table as if she were a stranger. You gave her the worst seat in the entire hall, and now, in your own wedding speech, you publicly humiliate her. You throw her out of here as if she were an intruder when she is the woman who gave her whole life for you." He turned to the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that this wedding will not take place. I cannot join my life with someone who is capable of such contempt for her own family." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Grace fell to her knees, sobbing. "Mom, please tell him to stay. Tell him everything can be fixed." But I had already started walking toward the exit. my head held high, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. I walked out of the hall, the sound of whispers and gasps following me like a shadow. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in hours, I could breathe. I found a bench in the garden and sat down, my hands trembling in my lap. I could still hear Grace's cries echoing from inside, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Not after everything that had just happened. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was Victoria. "Amelia, I just heard what happened. Are you all right?" I tried to steady my voice. "I don't know what I am, Victoria. I feel like I've been cracked open. I'm humiliated, but I'm also relieved. Someone finally saw me. Someone finally told the truth." "Come to my house tonight," Victoria said gently. "You shouldn't be alone." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I'll be there soon." As I stood to leave, I saw guests beginning to trickle out of the hall, some glancing at me with pity, others with curiosity. I kept my head high, refusing to let them see how much I was hurting. I walked to the street where Victoria was waiting in her car. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I let myself cry. At her house, we sat in the kitchen, drinking chamomile tea. The silence between us was comfortable, the kind that only exists between sisters who have shared a lifetime of secrets. "You did nothing wrong, Amelia," Victoria said. "You gave Grace everything. If she can't see that, it's her loss." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "I just don't know how to go on from here. I spent my whole life being her mother. Who am I now?" Victoria squeezed my hand. "You're still you. You're still the woman who survived, who sacrificed, who loved. Maybe now it's time to find out who you are outside of being Grace's mother." That night, I slept in Victoria's guest room. I woke before dawn, the events of the previous day replaying in my mind. I thought about Theodore's words, about the way he had defended me, about the look of realization on Grace's face. I wondered if she would ever understand the pain she had caused, if she would ever try to make things right. The next morning, my phone rang again. It was Grace. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again until finally I answered. "Mom, please," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Theodore left. He's gone. I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, feeling the old urge to comfort her, to fix everything. But I couldn't do it this time. "Grace, you need to take responsibility for what you've done. You hurt me. You pushed away the people who loved you most. I can't fix this for you." She was silent for a long time. "I know. I'm sorry, Mom, I really am. I hope you are, Grace. I hope you find a way to make things right. But you have to do it yourself." After I hung up, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing after Grace, begging for her love. I was standing still, letting her come to me if she wanted to. I spent the day with Victoria, helping her in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. I realized that I had spent so long defining myself by my daughter's needs that I had forgotten how to be my own person. That evening, as the sun set, Victoria and I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn pink and gold. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "I don't know. But I think I want to find out who I am when I'm not just Grace's mother. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll volunteer. Maybe I'll just learn to enjoy my own company," Victoria smiled. "Whatever you do, you'll do it with the same strength you've always had." I smiled back, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. The days that followed were a strange mix of grief and relief. I stayed with Victoria, letting her warmth and steady presence fill the empty spaces left by Grace's rejection. We spent our mornings walking in the park, our afternoons cooking simple meals, and our evenings talking about everything except the wedding. I found comfort in the routine, in the gentle rhythm of a life that was suddenly my own. Grace called every day. Sometimes she left voicemails full of apologies. Sometimes she sent long, rambling texts about her heartbreak and confusion. I read them all, but I didn't respond. I needed time. I needed space to remember who I was before my world revolved around her. One afternoon, as Victoria and I were sorting through old family photos, my phone rang again. This time it was Theodore. My heart skipped. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Amelia, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Theodore. How are you?" He sighed. "I'm healing, I suppose. I wanted to thank you for your dignity that night." I know it must have been unbearable, I swallowed hard. Thank you for standing up for me. No one has done that in a long time. He was quiet for a moment. I wanted you to know that I'm starting a new project, a community center for women who feel invisible, who have given everything and been left behind. I'd like you to be a part of it. You have so much wisdom, so much strength. I think you could help a lot of people. I was stunned. I don't know what to say, Theodore. I've never done anything like that before. You've lived it, Mrs. Amelia. That's more important than any degree or title. We agreed to meet for coffee the next week to talk more. After I hung up, Victoria grinned. See? The world is bigger than Grace's approval. You have so much to give, Amelia. That night, I lay awake thinking about the possibility of a new purpose. I realized that for the first time in years, I was excited about something that had nothing to do with my daughter. I was nervous, but I was also hopeful. The next week, I met Theodore at a small cafe downtown. He showed me the blueprints for the center, talked about his vision for a place where women could gather, learn, and support each other. I want you to help me shape this, Amelia. I want you to be the heart of it. I looked at the plans, imagining myself in those rooms, surrounded by women who understood what it meant to be overlooked, to be taken for granted. I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. I'll do it, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning, fundraising, and building. I threw myself into the work, learning new skills, meeting new people, and slowly rebuilding my confidence. The center opened in the spring, and on the first day, dozens of women walked through the doors, each carrying her own story of sacrifice and survival. I listened to them, shared my own story, and watched as friendships blossomed and lives began to change. I realized that my pain had not been in vain. It had become the foundation for something beautiful. Grace continued to reach out, her messages growing less frantic and more reflective. She started seeing a therapist, began volunteering at a local shelter, and slowly, tentatively, tried to rebuild her life. She wrote me a letter, the first in years, admitting her mistakes and asking for a chance to start over, not as a daughter demanding love, but as a woman seeking forgiveness. I read her letter over and over, my heart aching with both love and caution. I wasn't ready to let her back in completely, but I was willing to try. I wrote back, telling her about the center, about the women I'd met, about the new life I was building. I told her that forgiveness was a journey, not a destination, and that I hoped we could walk it together, one step at a time. As summer turned to fall, I found myself looking forward to each new day. I was no longer just Grace's mother. I was Amelia, strong, resilient, and finally, truly seen. The community center became my second home. Every morning, I unlocked the doors and was greeted by the hum of conversation, the clatter of coffee cups, and the laughter of women who, like me, had once felt invisible. We held workshops on everything from financial literacy to painting, and every week a new face would appear. Someone who had heard about the center and wanted to find a place where she belonged. I found myself growing in ways I never expected. I learned to organize events, to speak in front of groups, to listen without judgment. I became a mentor, a confidant, and sometimes just a friend. The women who came to the center brought their own stories of heartbreak and hope, and together, we built something stronger than any one of us could have managed alone. Victoria was my constant support, helping with paperwork and cheering me on at every milestone. Theodore became a trusted partner, always encouraging me to trust my instincts and reminding me that my experience was my greatest asset. We celebrated every small victory, a woman finding a job, another reconnecting with her estranged children, someone else learning to stand up for herself for the first time in decades. One afternoon, as I was leading a support group, I looked around the circle and realized how far I had come. I was no longer defined by Grace's rejection. I was no longer waiting for her approval to feel worthy. I had found my own family, my own purpose, and it was enough. Grace and I began to rebuild our relationship slowly and carefully. She started coming to the center, at first just to drop off donations or attend a workshop, but eventually to volunteer. She listened to the women's stories, sometimes sharing her own, and I saw her begin to change. She was humbler, more open, and for the first time in years, she seemed genuinely interested in who I was, not just as her mother, but as a person. We started meeting for lunch once a week, talking about our lives, our hopes, and our regrets. Grace apologized often, sometimes in words, sometimes in actions. She helped me organize a fundraiser, stayed late to clean up after events, and even brought Victoria flowers on her birthday. The walls between us began to crumble, replaced by something new and fragile, a tentative trust. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the center, Grace and I sat on the porch watching the sun set. She turned to me, her eyes full of emotion. "Mom, I know I can never undo what I did, but I want you to know that I see you now. I see everything you did for me, everything you sacrificed. I'm sorry it took me so long." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We can't change the past, Grace, but we can choose what we do with today." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I want to be a better daughter. I want to be someone you can be proud of." I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. "I already am, Grace. I always was. I just needed to remember who I was, too." As the days grew shorter and the air turned crisp, I realized that my life had become richer than I ever imagined. I had found strength in my pain, purpose in my loneliness, and love in the most unexpected places. I was no longer waiting for someone else to give me value. I had found it within myself. And as I watched Grace walk home that evening, her head held high, I knew that we were both finally free. Free to love, to forgive, and to begin again. Winter settled in, blanketing the city in quiet and cold, but inside the community center, warmth and laughter flourished. The women decorated the halls with handmade ornaments, and we hosted a holiday dinner for anyone who needed a place to belong. I watched as women who had once arrived with downcast eyes now greeted each other with hugs and inside jokes. The center had become a haven, a place where no one was invisible and every story mattered. Grace continued to volunteer, and our relationship grew stronger with each passing week. She no longer came to me only in crisis or with demands. Instead, she asked about my day, listened to my stories, and even invited me to her apartment for dinner. The first time I sat at her table, eating a meal she had cooked herself, I realized how much we had both changed. There was no tension, no unspoken resentment, just two women, mother and daughter, learning to know each other as adults. One snowy afternoon, Theodore stopped by the center with a box of pastries. He had become a close friend, someone I could rely on for advice and encouragement. "You've built something incredible here, Amelia," he said, looking around at the bustling room. "You've given these women and yourself a second chance." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I never would have believed it was possible, Theodore. Not after everything that happened," he nodded. "Sometimes the worst moments in our lives are the ones that set us free." As the holidays approached, Grace and I decided to host a New Year's Eve party at the center. We invited everyone, women from the support groups, their families, Victoria and her children, Theodore, and even some of Grace's old friends. The night was filled with music, dancing, and laughter. At midnight, as we all counted down to the new year, I looked around the room and felt a surge of hope. I was surrounded by people who valued me, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. After the party, Grace and I walked home together through the snow. She slipped her arm through mine, just as she had when she was a little girl. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly, "for not giving up on me, for finding your own happiness, even when I couldn't give it to you." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you for coming back, for trying, for letting me be more than just your mother." We stood in the quiet street, snowflakes swirling around us, and I realized that forgiveness is not a single act, but 1,000 small choices. It is choosing to see the good in someone, even when they have hurt you. It is choosing to let go of the past, to make room for something new. The new year brought new challenges and new joys. The center expanded its programs, offering classes in everything from computer skills to yoga. More women found their way to us, each bringing her own story, her own pain, her own hope. I watched as friendships blossomed, as women found jobs, reconnected with family, and learned to believe in themselves again. Grace and I continued to rebuild our relationship, one conversation at a time. There were still moments of awkwardness, still old wounds that ached on cold nights, but there was also laughter, shared secrets, and a growing sense of trust. We were no longer trapped in the old patterns of guilt and resentment. We were building something new, something stronger. One evening, as we sat together in my apartment, Grace turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever be the way we were before?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No, I think we'll be better. We're not the same people we were. We've both grown. We've both learned." She smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "I like that. I like who we're becoming." As I watched her leave that night, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had lost so much, but I had gained even more. I was no longer defined by my daughter's love or her rejection. I was Amelia, strong, resilient, and finally, truly free. Spring arrived with a gentle promise of renewal. The city thawed, and so did the last traces of bitterness in my heart. At the community center, we planted a small garden in the courtyard. Women who had once been strangers now knelt side by side, their hands in the earth, laughing as they planned what to grow. I watched Monica, a woman in her 50s, who had come to us after her own daughter stopped speaking to her, gently pat the soil around a row of daffodil bulbs. "It's never too late to start over," she said, and I realized how true that was for all of us. Grace and I continued to meet for lunch every week. Our conversations grew deeper, more honest. She told me about her therapy, about the guilt she still carried, about her fears of repeating old mistakes. I listened, sometimes offering advice, sometimes just holding her hand. We were learning to be vulnerable with each other, to trust that our love could survive even the hardest truths. One afternoon, Grace invited me to speak at her workplace for International Women's Day. I was nervous, but she stood beside me as I told my story. About raising her alone, about the sacrifices I made, about the pain of being pushed aside and the joy of finding my own purpose. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Grace hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Mom." The center continued to thrive. We started a mentorship program pairing older women with younger ones who needed guidance. I watched friendships blossom, watched women find their voices, watched lives change. Theodore and I worked together on a new project, an outreach program for women in rural areas. He became not just a colleague, but a dear friend, someone I could laugh with, confide in, and rely on. Victoria remained my anchor, always ready with a cup of tea and a listening ear. She helped me navigate the challenges of running the center, celebrated every success, and reminded me to take care of myself. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Amelia," she'd say, pressing a plate of cookies into my hands. Grace's journey was not without setbacks. There were days when she struggled, when old patterns resurfaced, when she doubted her worth. But she kept going, kept trying, kept showing up. She started volunteering at the center, leading workshops on career development and self-esteem. The women loved her, and I saw her begin to love herself too. One evening, as we closed up the center, Grace turned to me. "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive me, Mom?" I looked at her, seeing not the child I had raised, but the woman she had become. "I think forgiveness is something we build one day at a time. I'm not sure I'll ever forget, but I know I love you. And I know I'm proud of the woman you're becoming." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for giving me another chance." As the days grew longer and the garden bloomed, I realized that my life was fuller than I had ever imagined. I had found purpose, friendship, and a new kind of family. I had learned that it's never too late to start over, never too late to heal, never too late to love. And as I watched Grace laugh with the women at the center, as I listened to the stories of hope and resilience that filled our halls, I knew that the hardest day of my life had led me to the most beautiful chapter yet. Summer brought a golden warmth to the city, and with it, a sense of celebration. The community center was busier than ever. We hosted outdoor picnics, art fairs, and music nights under the stars. Women who had once arrived with nothing but sorrow now danced barefoot in the grass, their laughter echoing into the evening. I watched them, sometimes with tears in my eyes, marveling at how far we had all come. Grace and I grew closer with each passing week. She became a fixture at the center, not just as my daughter, but as a leader in her own right. She started a book club, organized a clothing drive, and even led a workshop on setting healthy boundaries. I saw her confidence blossom, her voice grow stronger, her heart open wider. She was no longer the woman who had pushed me away at her wedding. She was someone new, someone I was proud to know, not just as a mother, but as a friend. One afternoon, as we sat together in the garden, Grace turned to me. "Mom, do you ever regret what happened? The wedding, everything that came after?" I thought for a long moment, watching a butterfly land on a sunflower. "I regret the pain, Grace. I regret the years we lost. But I don't regret where we are now. Sometimes the hardest things lead us to the places we're meant to be." She nodded, her eyes shining. "I feel the same. I wish I could take back the hurt, but I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything." Victoria joined us, carrying a tray of lemonade. "You two are the strongest women I know," she said, settling beside us. "You've shown everyone here what it means to forgive, to rebuild, to love without conditions." Theodore stopped by later, bringing news of a grant we'd received for the center. "We're going to be able to expand our programs," he said, his excitement contagious. More women, more hope, more lives changed. That evening, we celebrated with a potluck dinner at the center. Women brought dishes from their childhoods, sharing recipes and stories. We ate, we laughed, we danced. As the sun set, I stood at the edge of the garden, watching the lights twinkle in the trees, and felt a deep sense of peace. Grace found me there, slipping her arm around my waist. "Thank you, Mom, for everything. For not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." I hugged her tightly. "Thank you for coming back, for choosing to grow, to change, to love." As the night wore on, I realized that the center was more than just a building. It was a testament to the power of second chances, to the strength of women who refused to be defined by their pain. It was a place where love was rebuilt, where families were mended, where hope was always possible. The next morning, as I walked through the quiet halls of the center, I paused to look at the wall of photos we'd created. Images of women laughing, learning, supporting each other. In the center was a picture of Grace and me, arms around each other, both of us smiling with genuine joy. I touched the frame, feeling gratitude for every step of the journey. I had lost so much, but I had gained even more. I was no longer just Grace's mother. I was Amelia, mentor, friend, survivor, and builder of new beginnings. As summer faded into autumn, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready. I had found my voice, my purpose, and my place in the world, and I knew, without a doubt, that I would never again let anyone make me feel invisible. Autumn arrived with a crispness in the air and a golden glow in the trees. The community center's garden was ablaze with color, and the women gathered to harvest the last of the tomatoes and herbs, laughing as they worked side by side. I watched them from the window, a mug of tea warming my hands, and felt a deep sense of contentment. My life, once defined by longing and loss, was now full of purpose and connection. Grace and I had settled into a new rhythm. We met for coffee every Sunday, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at mine, sometimes at a little cafe near the center. Our conversations were honest and open, sometimes painful, but always healing. We talked about the past, about the choices we'd made, about the ways we'd hurt each other, and the ways we'd grown. There were still moments of awkwardness, still old wounds that ached on cold nights, but there was also laughter, forgiveness, and a growing sense of trust. One Sunday, Grace surprised me by inviting Victoria and Theodore to join us. We sat together, sharing stories and memories, and I realized how much my circle had grown. I was surrounded by people who valued me, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. I was no longer chasing after love or approval. I had found both right where I was. The community center continued to thrive. We launched a new program for young mothers, offering parenting classes and support groups. We started a scholarship fund for women returning to school. Every week, new faces appeared, women seeking hope, seeking help, seeking a place to belong. I welcomed them all, remembering how lost I had once felt and how much it meant to be seen. Grace became a leader at the center, her confidence and compassion inspiring others. She spoke at events, mentored younger women, and helped organize our annual fundraiser. Watching her, I felt a pride that was deeper and more complex than anything I had known before. She was not just my daughter, she was my friend, my partner, my equal. One evening, as we closed up the center, Grace turned to me. "Mom, do you ever wish things had been different? That we hadn't gone through all that pain?" I thought for a moment, looking around at the place we had built together. "Sometimes, but then I look at where we are now, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. We found our way back to each other. We built something beautiful out of the ashes." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I'm glad you never gave up on me." I hugged her, feeling the truth of her words settle in my heart. "I'm glad you came back." As the leaves fell and the days grew shorter, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had taken. The pain, the loss, the struggle, but also the love, the growth, the victories. We had been tested, and we had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. On the anniversary of the center's opening, we held a celebration. Women from all over the city came, sharing stories of transformation and hope. Grace gave a speech, her voice steady and full of conviction. "This place saved me," she said. "It gave me a second chance, not just with my mother, but with myself. I am proof that it's never too late to change, to heal, to love." As I listened, tears filled my eyes. I realized that my story was not just about loss, but about redemption. Not just about pain, but about possibility. I had found my voice, my purpose, and my place in the world. And I knew, without a doubt, that I would never again let anyone make me feel invisible. That night, as I walked home under the stars, I felt a peace I had never known before. I was Amelia, strong, resilient, and finally, truly free. If this story moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up for yourself or someone you love? Tell us your story in the comments below. Your voice might inspire someone else. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories of family, courage, and second chances. Thank you for being part of our community.